Kobe Bryant. On January 26, 2020, basketball fans worldwide were stunned by the sudden death of Kobe Bryant, the 41-year-old legend who had built his legacy as one of the greatest players in NBA history. That morning, Bryant boarded a Sikorsky S-76B helicopter in Orange County, California, alongside his 13-year-old daughter Gianna and 7 others. They were headed to a youth basketball tournament at Bryant's Mamba Sports Academy in Thousand Oaks. The helicopter took off at 9:06 a.m. under special visual flight rules. The weather that day was unusually foggy, with visibility dropping to under 3 miles. The pilot, Arazobian, was experienced with approximately 8,200 flight hours, but even he struggled with the deteriorating conditions. As the helicopter climbed to avoid the low cloud ceiling, visibility continued to worsen. The pilot was granted special clearance to navigate through controlled airspace. Minutes later, Zobayan announced he was climbing to avoid a cloud layer. The helicopter reached 2,300 feet before making a sharp left turn. What happened next was catastrophic. The aircraft suddenly began descending at a rate of over 4,000 feet per minute. Flight data showed the helicopter was traveling at approximately 190 miles per hour when it slammed into the hillside of Calabasas. The impact was so violent that the aircraft shattered on contact, scattering debris across the steep terrain. The wreckage immediately burst into flames, scorching the surrounding brush. All 9 people aboard, 8 passengers and the pilot, died from the crash. The severity of the impact was extreme. Medical examiners later confirmed that Bryant's body was identified through fingerprints, as the crash had caused such extensive damage that visual identification was impossible. When first responders arrived at the remote hillside, they found only devastation. The fog was so thick that even police helicopters had been grounded that morning, forcing rescue teams to hike to the wreckage. Len Bias. On June 19, 1986, the sports world was rocked by news that seemed impossible to believe. Just 40 hours earlier, Len Bias had been selected 2nd overall in the NBA draft by the Boston Celtics, a team that had just won the championship. The 22-year-old University of Maryland star was considered by many scouts to be the equal of Michael Jordan in raw athletic ability. His future wasn't just bright, it was blinding. After being drafted, Bias returned to College Park, Maryland to celebrate with friends in his dormitory. The celebration began on the evening of June 18. According to witness accounts and police reports, in the early morning hours of June 19th, Bias and several companions used pixie dust in his dormitory suite. For Bias, this moment would prove fatal. Around 6:30 a.m., something changed. Bias suddenly seized up. His 6'7" frame convulsed violently, then collapsed onto the floor. Brian Tribble, one of Bias's friends, called emergency services at 6:32 a.m. Paramedics arrived within minutes to find Bias unresponsive on the floor. They attempted cardiopulmonary resuscitation as they rushed him to Leland Memorial Hospital. Inside the emergency room, doctors worked frantically to restart his heart. The pixie dust had triggered a cardiac arrhythmia, an irregular heartbeat so severe that blood could no longer properly circulate through his body. At 8:55 a.m., after all resuscitation efforts had failed, Len Bias was pronounced dead of cardiac arrhythmia related to pixie dust usage. Despite having the physique of an elite athlete, his cardiovascular system had been overwhelmed by the substance. Len Bias was pronounced dead, having never signed his NBA contract or played a single professional minute. Bison Dele. On July 6, 2002, a luxury catamaran named the Hakuna Matata set sail from Tahiti into the South Pacific with 4 people aboard. At the helm was Bison Dele, the 33-year-old former NBA player who had walked away from a 5-year, $36 million contract just 3 years earlier to pursue a life of adventure. Accompanying him were his girlfriend Serena Carlin, the boat's captain Bertrand Saldo, and Dele's older brother, Miles DeBoard. What began as an idyllic voyage through paradise soon turned sinister. The relationship between the brothers had always been strained. DeBoard, born Kevin Williams, had lived in the shadow of his more successful younger brother his entire life. Witnesses reported tensions between the two in the days before departure. The tension on the 55-foot vessel, isolated in the vast emptiness of the ocean, intensified with nowhere to escape. In early July, somewhere in the South Pacific, something terrible happened. French authorities later theorized that a violent confrontation erupted aboard the vessel. What exactly transpired remains uncertain, as no witnesses survived to provide testimony. On July 20th, DeBoer sailed the Hakuna Matata back to Tahiti alone. The other 3 passengers, Dele, Carlin, and Saldo, were gone. He attempted to impersonate his brother and withdraw large sums of money from Dele's accounts. When authorities closed in, DeBoard fled to Mexico and then to California. On September 27th, after learning he was the prime suspect, DeBoard took a lethal dose of insulin and slipped into a coma. He died without ever confirming what happened on the catamaran. French authorities believe Dele, Carlin, and Saldo were killed and their bodies disposed of at sea, but the exact circumstances of their deaths remain unknown. The bodies have never been recovered. Lorenzen Wright. On July 19, 2010, former NBA player Lorenzen Wright left his ex-wife's home in Collierville, Tennessee. The 34-year-old had played for 5 NBA teams during his 13-year career, earning over $55 million. He was visiting Memphis to attend his sister's baby shower and to bring his children home to Atlanta. No one knew this would be the last time he was seen alive. Just after midnight, a 911 dispatcher received a call from Wright's cell phone. The recording captured the sound of multiple gunshots. A man's voice could be heard. The dispatcher tried to get a location, but the call abruptly ended. Despite the distress call, the recording was not immediately prioritized for investigation. When Wright failed to return to Atlanta, his family filed a missing person report on July 22nd. Police began a cursory search, but progress was slow. On July 28th, searchers found Wright's body in a wooded area off Callis Cutoff Road, southeast of Memphis. Medical examiners determined he had been shot multiple times. The bullet wounds and location suggested a homicide. The case went cold for 7 years until investigators uncovered the shocking truth. Wright's ex-wife, Shara Wright Robinson, had conspired with a man named Billy Ray Turner to kill her former husband. Evidence revealed they had planned the murder in advance. The motive? A $1 million life insurance policy Shara had taken out on Wright. In 2019, she pleaded guilty to facilitation of first-degree murder and was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Dražen Petrović. On June 7, 1993, one of basketball's brightest international stars was returning from playing with the Croatian national team in Poland. The 28-year-old New Jersey Nets guard had just completed his best NBA season, averaging 22.3 points per game, with a field goal accuracy rate of 51.8%. Following a qualification tournament for the 1993 Eurobasket in Wrocław, Poland, Petrović decided to skip his scheduled flight back to Zagreb and instead drive through Germany. His journey would take him on the Autobahn 9, a highway system famous for having no speed limits in certain sections. Petrović was not driving. He sat in the passenger seat of a red Volkswagen Golf with Clara Salanci, a woman he had been romantically involved with for only a few weeks. Behind the wheel, in the back seat, was Hilal Edebal, a Turkish basketball player. It had been raining heavily that afternoon near Denkendorf, creating dangerous conditions on the typically fast-moving highway. Visibility was poor as they traveled southbound at high speed. Petrović had fallen asleep in the passenger seat. At approximately 5:20 p.m., they approached an unexpected obstacle. A truck from the Netherlands, traveling in the opposite northbound lanes, had swerved to avoid a collision with another vehicle. The truck driver lost control, broke through the Autobahn median barrier, and crashed into the southbound lanes. The truck came to a stop, blocking all 3 lanes of southbound traffic. The driver exited the vehicle and attempted to wave down oncoming traffic. On the wet road and at high speed, Salanci had only seconds to react when the stopped truck came into view. She braked and lost control of the small Volkswagen, which crashed into the truck. The impact was severe. The passenger side of the vehicle, where Petrović was seated, sustained the greatest damage. Petrović had not been wearing a seatbelt. The force of the collision ejected him from the vehicle, causing severe head trauma. Emergency responders arrived at the scene and attempted resuscitation, but the injuries were fatal. According to the autopsy report, Petrović died on impact from severe head injuries. Both Salanci and Edebal survived the accident but sustained serious injuries. Edebal suffered severe memory loss and would never play basketball again. Eddie Griffin. On August 17, 2007, former NBA player Eddie Griffin drove his Nissan SUV through the streets of Houston, Texas. The 25-year-old had once been considered among basketball's most promising talents, selected 7th overall in the 2001 NBA draft. But his career had been derailed by personal struggles, including battles with alcohol. That night would prove to be his last. At approximately 1:30 in the morning, Griffin's vehicle approached a railroad crossing in the 5300 block of Lawndale in southeast Houston. As Griffin neared the intersection, warning signals were active. Crossing arms were down, red lights flashed, and warning signals sounded, alerting of an approaching Union Pacific freight train. According to authorities, Griffin's SUV went through the crossing arm and into the path of the oncoming train. The locomotive struck Griffin's vehicle. The SUV burst into flames on impact. The impact and subsequent fire were fatal. Griffin died at the scene. The fire burned his body so badly that investigators were unable to identify him for 4 days. Medical examiners later used dental records to confirm his identity. Toxicology reports revealed his blood alcohol level was 0.26, more than 3 times the legal limit in Texas of 0.08. The Harris County Medical Examiner's Office determined Griffin died of multiple blunt force injuries. His injuries included 2 collapsed lungs, a lacerated liver and kidney, 4 broken ribs, and burns over most of his body. Bryce Dejean-Jones. On May 28, 2016, NBA rookie Bryce Dejean-Jones arrived in Dallas, Texas. The 23-year-old New Orleans Pelicans guard was visiting to celebrate his daughter's first birthday with his girlfriend. They were staying at the Camden Belmont apartment complex. His girlfriend lived on the 4th floor, and this was Dejean-Jones' first visit to her new apartment. This unfamiliar layout would prove fatally confusing. Around 3:20 in the morning, Dejean-Jones returned to the complex after going for a walk following an argument with his girlfriend. His girlfriend and daughter were asleep in their 4th floor apartment. Disoriented in the unfamiliar building, Dejean-Jones mistakenly went to the 3rd floor instead. The layouts were similar, and in his state of confusion, he approached what he thought was his girlfriend's door. It was actually 1 floor below. Finding himself unable to enter, Dejean-Jones began kicking the door. After several forceful kicks, the door frame splintered and the lock gave way. What Dejean-Jones didn't know was that this apartment belonged to a man who had never met him, a stranger who was now awakened by the violent sound of his front door being broken down in the middle of the night. The resident, startled awake, grabbed his gun from his nightstand. As Dejean-Jones entered the apartment and began shouting for his girlfriend, he approached and kicked open the bedroom door. The resident, who had called out but received no answer, thought the person breaking in intended to harm him. He fired his handgun through the bedroom door, striking Dejean-Jones in the abdomen. Despite his injuries, Dejean-Jones managed to leave the apartment. He collapsed in an outdoor passageway. Police arrived and transported him to a hospital, where he died from his injuries. According to a report from the NBA's senior vice president and chief security officer, no charges were filed against the apartment resident. Under Texas law, a person is allowed to use deadly force to defend themselves in their home. Malik Sealy. On May 20th, 2000, Minnesota Timberwolves guard Malik Sealy was driving home from a celebration. The 30-year-old had just attended teammate Kevin Garnett's 24th birthday party at a local restaurant. It was after 4 in the morning as Sealy traveled northbound on Highway 100 in his luxury SUV. The road was nearly empty at that hour. Unknown to Sealy, a 43-year-old man named Suksangwana Fengzin was driving in the opposite direction, except he wasn't in the opposite lane. Fengzin's pickup truck was traveling the wrong way on Highway 100. He had spent the evening drinking. Blood tests would later show his blood alcohol level was 0.19, nearly twice the legal limit in Minnesota at the time, which was 0.1. The two vehicles collided head-on. The impact was severe. Sealy died from head and chest injuries in the collision. Neither driver had been wearing a seatbelt. Fengzin's airbag deployed, but Sealy's SUV did not have an airbag. Fengzin survived the crash with head and chest injuries and was hospitalized in serious condition. According to St. Louis Park Police, Sealy was dead upon their arrival at the crash scene, around 5 a.m. The Minnesota State Patrol arrested Fengzin on Monday, May 22nd. He was charged with criminal vehicular operation. Fengzin later pleaded guilty to vehicular manslaughter and was sentenced to 4 years in prison, serving 3 years before his release in 2003. The Timberwolves organization was devastated by the loss. Sealy had been instrumental in the team's turnaround that season, helping Minnesota achieve a franchise-best 50-32 record. In his honor, the Minnesota Timberwolves retired his number 2 jersey. If you want to see more videos like this, click the video on screen now and make sure to subscribe.